Hello everyone. Welcome to the 10th Historical Games Network panel. That's quite a few now at this point. And you can find out more about the network over at the website, including the previous themes from the previous talks and recordings, which are on YouTube, over at the HGN website, which is at historicalgames.net. And I'm sure that it's going to get posted in the chat soon as well. We are very grateful also that this panel has been funded by the Birmingham Centre for Media and Cultural Research. So the way this works is I'm the chair. I will field some of the questions, but hopefully you won't be hearing too much from me because we have a wonderful selection of panelists today, which I'll be first introducing, and then we'll get on to the questions. But really quickly, I should say who I am. Hello, my name is Dr. Dimitrios Darzentas. I'm a lecturer and program leader for games development over at Edinburgh Napier University, and that's probably all you need to know about me. So we'll go a little bit in an order. I will give our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves before we go over to the questions. So let us begin with Dr. Amy Hondsmerk.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Dimitrios. So as you mentioned, I'm Amy. I am no longer in academia. I'm trying to escape, I say, getting dragged back into things constantly. But my background is in museums and heritage. I've been working in the sector in a variety of museum and heritage sites across the last 7 or 8 years. But then I discovered during my master's, which I did in museum and heritage development at Nottingham-Trent University, that you can study games. And I love video games. I've been a long-term game player. So I then went on to do a PhD looking at how video games might be used more in museum interpretation and sort of exploring the similarities between the mediums. So that's my background in that, and I currently work for Historic England.
Fantastic, thank you. And next, Hannah Price.
Hi, I'm Hannah Price. I started in theatre, but I now mainly work as a creative director working across immersive experiences, most of which have a historical background. I also am a game performance director working across lots of very well-known games like Alan Wake 2, Final Fantasy 16, Control, things like that. But when I'm working when I work in the immersive sphere, I've made things like the Gunpowder Plot, and I was working on a new Museum of Shakespeare. And for both of those things, we used a lot of different type of technologies to explore how we can really bring that history to life in an immersive sense, with a very audience-focused kind of response to a narrative storytelling within both live and technological kind of aspects.
All right, thank you. And finally, let me get this right, Jonathan Ferguson, Keeper of Firearms and Artillery at the Royal Armouries.
Yes, thank you. I think my job title does what it says on the tin. All the guns, I look after all the guns. We have many colleagues here who, conservation department, my colleagues in my team and in others, I'm not solely responsible for all of the guns here at the Royal Armouries, but I suppose I'm in charge of the sort of intellectual side of that, which involves a bit of looking after them as well. But don't like to make out that I'm running the show. But I've been doing this versions of this job for 15 years here, and a museum career stretching out past that I won't bore you with. And lately doing quite a bit on the gaming side, consultancy stuff, and on YouTube. And I was reminded recently that I actually managed to get published on the subject as well, but I'm very, very behind on the literature, so I need to catch up.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And we'll have a bit of a chance later to expand on backgrounds, especially following the first question. So we'll go through a few we have, and we very much welcome questions from the audience as well. So our first question is, by way of introducing yourselves, can you all speak a little bit to the ways that you've engaged with technologies in your work and what you think those specific tools and technologies have allowed you to do with the subject matter that you have worked on? And let me pick somebody at random to kick this off, unless somebody's really raring to go. How about Hannah?
Did you say me?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I mean, I work with technology all the time. When I'm working as a creative director, we have a very specific kind of approach to how we would use technology, which is we work out what the story is first. It sounds really obvious, and everything that we want to achieve with it, and then we work out which bit of technology is going to help us best tell that story within the kind of sphere of what we have to play with. And because quite often I'm working on location-based experiences, which means we have a particular kind of environment that we have to work within. So for the Gunpowder Plot, we were in the vaults, which are part of the Tower of London estate. So they're UNESCO World Heritage vaults. They have a lot of things in them that you can't change or work with. They have a lot of trouble with circulation space. So we started, when we were working out how to plot through the Gunpowder Plot, of what bits of the story we wanted to tell, and how it became obvious to us that anything we wanted to show that was like a vista or was used a lot of environment had to be VR, because there was no way we could show, for example, going down the river in 1605 within the small windy spaces that we had, and we were better off using those for much more of the atmospheric, more physical experiences that you have in it. So that's the kind of approach that we take. And I work with literally everything from ambisonic and binaural sound, VR, like I said, AR, projection mapping, volume technology, so working on large scale of the LED technology, volumetric capture, holograms, AI, and also because I work in games, I work a lot with kind of high level performance capture technology, from mocap to full performance capture, like I said, volumetric, which is quite a slightly different beast. But all of it really is about how do you best get that story to be the most emotional, the most impactful, the best it can be, which I'm sure is how most people, when you're making something work with technology, how do we make it work for us and make sure the audience is kept within the story and not thrown out by it, which I know we're going to talk a bit about later, but that I think is one of the key problems when you're trying to do something that bridges the physical and the digital.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. So, if you're hearing less from me, would anybody like to jump in? I'm holding back because it's very similar
I
experience
don't
I
mind
have.
going
Please go ahead.
next. Fascinating stuff. Thanks, Hannah. I haven't engaged as much with technology because I'm not myself a game maker. I haven't really worked with game companies. I'm very much self-taught, but I've been looking quite broadly at the way museum and heritage sites have kind of used different gaming technologies, particularly around how to engage different audiences, whether that's using Minecraft to engage children with the idea of a museum. The Museum of Wales, I want to say, Museum of Cardiff, did a competition during COVID because all the students in Wales got free access to Minecraft, and they sort of encouraged them to build their own museum, and then they ran a whole competition, which I thought was really interesting, to how their sort of museums sort of adding different bits of technology in to sort of enhance game-like experiences, things like, as you said, VR, motion tracking, combining with haptic technology. I know it's been done with the ARIA Dambuster experience, which is fascinating stuff. 3D printing and QR codes, all these different ways of sort of embedding different technologies in games and game-like experiences, to either get people to engage more with the subject matter, or to, in some cases, get them to visit physical spaces where they might otherwise not have done, or to just sort of increase the immersion of that experience to help people engage more deeply with the subject matter, or to add another layer of that engagement. And the other thing that I have personally engaged quite a lot with is sort of actually quite simplistic technology around tools and technology and software that's designed for people who are beginners at making games, because I'm aware there's so many barriers that stop museums from making stuff, particularly in-house, financial knowledge, whatever it is. So I've been sort of engaging with things like Twine and Bitsy, which is sort of the beginner friendly, if you've never made a game before, this is where you might want to start, and looking at how might museums actually sort of learn through those, and sort of improve their understanding, so that whether it's in-house or in collaboration, the games in the future, they sort of understand better what they can do with them.
Thank you. Lots of thoughts and ideas there, but Jonathan?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So I feel like we're quite behind on not to inadvertently criticise the colleagues I mentioned earlier in our exhibitions team. I know they're as keen as I am to do this. We haven't really embraced digital technology, certainly not to the extent that, in terms of interactivity, things like VR, AR, anything like that. We've done some flat screen stuff over the years, and that's stuff that we really do want to solve. And we're embarking on a big master plan to redisplay all the galleries, and hopefully that will naturally, organically become part of that plan, and I will be a part of that, I hope. So my technology as it pertains to gaming is very analog. Shoots bullets mostly. And that's been my engagement with the subject, apart from being a gamer myself since I was about 12. And I think that's what's worked rather well with the Expert React series on the GameSpot channel, recently ended. That's been my deepest engagement in a way, although, well, perhaps I could talk more about from that perspective later in response to other questions. But essentially looking at how the digital technology reflects and represents the analog from the very narrow perspective of firearms. That's been fascinating. And then consultancy stuff, which we've been doing for actually quite a while, but has picked up since we've become a bit better known. And that's, well, it's kind of the same thing, really. It's to do with fidelity, verisimilitude, realism, that kind of thing. It's a bit of sound, but mainly it's the visual representation, animation, modeling, artwork. No mocap, but we have definitely done video reference, and I do a lot of reviewing of people's animations, artwork, models, etc. So I'm sort of like a weird version of an art critic in a way. So I have a strange perspective on technology, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
Brilliant, thank you. This pretty great panel actually, because there's a lot here where it's this thing where, especially place-based stuff, right? It's not with creative technology. It's going through the answers here. It's one of those things where you can't have a hammer and treat everything as a nail. You really have to go see what the story is, what the situation is, and find the right tech or combinations of tech and use them in a meaningful way. And as Amy, as you mentioned, I'm really keen on the finding out what technology is there, because a lot of the stuff I've done is something you make it, and then how do you get it to get the museum to adopt it, and it's the longevity of that thing. Those things have a long tail life that you need to support, and just dumping it and running, unfortunately, has been an issue. So finding technologies that are easy enough to get into, and that's half the struggle I have now with teaching these things. I find it's firearms is, I think, a very fitting example here, because they're ubiquitous in gaming, and it's a very mechanical, tactile, analog thing that people think they know, and people have tried to represent in games forever, sometimes to a strange degree. So it's a very nice case study to focus on, I think. But sorry, you're getting me all excited. This is thing. So, how about we go back to questions? Now, I have another one here. So moving a little bit more on the immersive stuff, so mixed reality, VR, stuff like that, things moving a little bit beyond the screen, you might say. How does immersion or immersive experience rather, what do they mean to you and your work, right? So what part do you think that technology plays, that technology in general plays in building that immersion and the audience engagement in games, and to what sort of effect it does this? I'm thinking here things like horseshoes and hand grenades, for example, based on what we were just saying, for example. Right, so anybody like to go first?
I suppose I'd better. Well, I think it's difficult in a way, but I'm also lucky because I come at it from both ways. I consume the end product, and then I'm invited to comment on and review and be involved with it as well. And then I work day to day with it, sort of day in, day out, bread and butter. So I'm kind of fully immersed in the immersion, as it were. What I hope I've developed over the years, especially of doing the YouTube stuff, is knowing when to shut up. So, or to caveat my comments and say, well, look, it doesn't actually matter. You're doing a sci-fi game, or you're doing an 8-bit graphic, art direction thing, or for whatever other reason, or alternatively, here's all the stuff I could give you, pick and choose, that kind of thing. So immersion means different things to me depending on what frame of mind I'm in, whether I'm thinking professionally or not, what the genre of game is, especially what the wishes of the developers and their consumers are. So hopefully I'm quite flexible on that, and it's not just a case of that's wrong. I don't think I've ever been like that, but 200 videos of criticizing stuff has really honed my. I'm always thinking about the poor artists and other people involved in developing this stuff as well. I don't want to drag them down. So I guess I want some sort of immersion. If the story's same with movies as well. If the story's absolutely incredible, I don't care if the gun's got 3 triggers. I can set that aside mentally and crack on. If it's purporting to be something historical, we're talking about historical stuff in theory here more so than contemporary. I will hold it to a much higher standard. The Ridley Scott effect, he purports to produce historically accurate stuff, so we hold him to a higher standard, even if what he's producing is historical fantasy at the end of the day. So I could rabbit on, but I'll let other people comment.
I see fingers moving to mute button. Sorry, go ahead.
So I guess one of the things that I do quite a lot if I go and work with cultural organizations or heritage organizations is talk to them about how to think immersively, and kind of try to sort of find out why they want to be engaged in something that's immersive, because we all know that word, it obviously means one thing in games, and then with live experiences it's been slapped on pretty much everything, anywhere. And I could dig out this fact, but I was looking at something and there was I think it was on Fever or something that they'd said that the use of the word ups the click rate. So it's definitely a kind of buzzword for people to buy tickets for things, because the move after the pandemic was much more to experiential money spending than it was for kind of one-offs or so that there's been that kind of move. Anyway, so I go and talk to them, kind of try and find out why. And one of the reasons that always comes up is kind of this idea that it will be stronger, you'll remember things better, and that is true. There was a study in Science Direct which said that hang on, I've got the quote here, it does make deeper emotional impact and a stronger internalization of information if you are in an immersive sphere. And partly this is around how our brains work. So when I go to speak to these kind of organizations, we talk about moving from storytelling to story doing, because when you are doing, we then experience what we're doing in the same way that we experience the world. So our brains obviously build a model of the world, and it's partly our perception, our senses, our own learning. And when you put these all together, we get that picture, and it's dependent on our own experience in the space. So when I go into something and say I'm going to make something immersive, we're looking at how we do that on a kind of wider scale, how we do that on a kind of experiential story doing level, and how you then make a story is quite different if you're thinking about people being within it and a kind of 360 space. So for me, thinking about immersion it means it's a whole different way of sharpening and telling stories and what is around it. And once you get to applying technology in that, it's exactly what I was saying at the beginning. How if I'm trying to put someone in the center of a story and I'm trying to think about what they're doing, do I then add the technology onto that to make that story wider, to give it more scope, to give them more kind of understanding within the space? And like Amy said, there's loads of things that can be anything from, on the Museum of Shakespeare, we were looking at a digital takeaway journey, so an RFID sort of journey, so you could self-curate, to something like the Gunpowder Plot, which is full headset, that whatever technology is applied needs to build the immersion in a way so those people feel like they're engaged in the story at every point, so they remember it, so they take it away, so they move away from it. And interestingly, what what Jonathan was saying, we with Gunpowder and with other like historical stuff, we come up a lot against this idea of of whether or not you should actually be telling like the truth, or how accurate is accurate, and like how much an audience can kind of take that in, and how much you need to use selective authenticity. So like in the gunpowder plot, we kept finding, for example, that some of the sets that we were building that were accurate, people were like, no way, you didn't have really colorful spaces in Jacobean England. So that would throw people out. So we had to kind of understand what the immersion was in the story versus the historical accuracy that people could like kind of hold, so that the story was central and not knocked out by any of those things, if that makes sense. And I'm sure Amy's got loads of understanding of this now. How
I was about to say, I'm so glad of everything you've just brought up. Oh, thank you, Hannah. That's absolutely to second the idea around involving emotion. That I came across a lot when I was doing my PhD, around the idea of sort of engaging, particularly in interpretation of museum collections and stories, the importance of engaging people emotionally and the role that immersive medium technology can play in that, through everything that you were just saying. And I think when I think about immersive, I am thinking sort of about how do we get that deeper engagement using different technologies. One of the big things I think is sort of the sensorial. I know you're talking about sort of engaging different senses. So, touch, sound, what you can see as well. Is that 360 space? Is that just, AR on a phone? And you have to sort of move around. How do people move around the space? So yeah, I do definitely think about all that kind of stuff when we think about immersive technologies. Definitely around that idea of emotional engagement, of getting people invested and involved in. And I'm really glad you said the word doing as well. That moving of storytelling for something that is said to you to something that you work through yourself. To give one really interesting example that I love bring up every time, because it's relevant to my current work as well. There was, I think it was an tree funded, I can't remember. But a blacksmith forge, Cambridge Forge in Spalding, created this VR blacksmith. And their thinking around was, well, we're going to hop on the VR hype, so to speak, but they did it really, really cleverly. They knew a lot of young people were interested in that kind of technology, and they knew they needed more young people to enter blacksmithing. And they knew that teaching the blacksmithing in the traditional way was often risky because, it's resource heavy, it's time heavy, and there's the inherent risk of having young people around very hot items. So they recreated a sort of forge in this VR space, and the idea was that the young people, through doing, would learn the principles of what blacksmiths did.
No, I think the aforementioned technical gremlins have struck.
Oh dear, hope she should be back. But
yeah.
It's interesting that she said multi-sensory there, because yeah, we use things like airflow, temperature, smells, water drips, all of it. I'm expecting.
Sorry, I think I got kicked out again.
We lost you
Wasn't
on the forge, just the end of the forge stuff.
Yes, I think I was just saying about learning through doing, because they wanted these young people to understand and actually do what blacksmiths do, so that when they then translated that to the actual space, they had that basic understanding already, and sort of it was much easier in that sense to sort of teach them because they've already done it. And particularly around technology, I love that they connected that up, and I'm thinking about digital physical spaces connected up to a 3D printer, so that the things that were made in that virtual blacksmith could then be 3D printed, and they could take that home and go, I made that, even though they didn't technically make it in the traditional sense. Sorry, that's all I wanted to say.
Brilliant. Anybody want to follow up on that? Or no, that's fascinating. Loving the story doing stuff. It's we found that everything there holds true. The moment you see this moment of realization in their eyes, the moment they realize that a task that they only knew as pressing the X button or on the controller, or the R button on a keyboard or something, is suddenly a whole bunch of manipulations and movements. And we have experimented with passive and active haptics to give weight to stuff. So giving people things that they see one thing in VR, but we're giving them something to hold, and they're like, oh, this, I don't know, gunpowder, barrel of gunpowder actually weighs a lot. That totally changes my perception of things. Right. Let's move on to the next question. Just checking my notes here. Okay. So our next question is, and this is a big one, what are some of the challenges that games and gaming technologies pose to engaging with the past or facilitating audience engagement with history? I have a lot of thoughts about this, but who would like to go first? Anna, do I see a hand there? Was that a hand? No?
No, I was just going to let someone
Nope.
pick off and see if I could
Okay.
bridge. I mean, I can if you like.
So have we lost Amy? I think so, but hopefully she'll rejoin us.
I guess the first one is in a live technology in a live environment sense, it is the bridge between when you move between technologies is really difficult if you're in something historic. I mean, in the gunpowder plot, which is it's still at the Tower of London if anyone wants to go, it's like a 90-minute experience where you are like in a film of the gunpowder plot and you're in it and you go through all these different rooms, and we've gone to a lot of expense to make it feel like you're in history, and then we're like, put on your VR headset, and we came up with a lot of different ideas to cross that boundary, but it still is odd. Like it's still something that, I mean, we talk about you're wearing your mask or you're putting on, whatever, but it still does kind of push you to make to make a change between your physical and your digital environment. It is weird. I mean, I guess that's the biggest one.
All right, the transitions. I know you always need that mediator, so it's a way of, sometimes we got lucky and we could sort of have that piece of tech fit in, mock up the VR headset, but it doesn't always work. So Amy, welcome back. Did you catch the question or?
Yes, I did catch.
Okay.
Well, I don't know why I
Yeah.
keep dropping out, if it's my Wi-Fi or something with Zoom. Anyway,
Zoom
apologies.
is a trial at the best of times. So how do we feel? Challenge so many, I'm not even sure where to start. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the definitely about 10 years ago, I would have said audience understanding of technology is a big one. I'd say that's not so much a deal anymore. I'm not sure if Hannah's covered this. Apologies, I did not hear what you said. But I think to an extent, particularly with the newer technologies, there's still very much a learning curve on the part of the player. So when you are introducing something like VR, you're going to encounter people who don't quite know how to navigate this space. It's sort of how do you introduce it in a way that is easy to understand, that they're going to get the most out of it, rather than spend half of the time sort of fumbling around working out what to do and not actually taking in the story that you're telling or the experience that they're going through. I think also another big challenge, particularly in the museum and heritage sector, is actually how museums understand games and how they sort of use them. So I think that a lot of the time they sort of think about games and go, oh, this is a fantastic learning experience, and then they try and make something, but actually it's not fun. And people don't play it because it's not fun. So I think finding that balance between making it still fun as a game, but also getting in, for example, things like learning outcomes or historical contents. It's a lot of it can be around sort of how do you find that balance. And that's something that I definitely don't have the answer to. It's it's very tricky and it's very much a case by case basis thing. But it's very much, I think, something that's in the minds of people increasingly in the museum and heritage sector around, is a game the right thing to use? Is this piece of technology the right thing to use? How can we most effectively use it? Is it the right thing for what we're trying to do? And then I think another relatively big barrier still is around financial situations. Actually, you've got a lot of these massive big institutions, the National Science Museum, for example, they have a bunch of games on their website because they have the funding that can enable them to A, make it, B, support it in the long, because I know you mentioned this earlier, Dimitrios, the idea of sort of like long-term support. It's all very well buying a VR headset, but do you actually have the finances in place to maintain that headset and to fix it when it breaks? So I think there's quite a lot of barriers there to actually using games and gaming technology that sort of prevent people from even starting that journey, but very much also then how do the audiences understand what we're doing? How do we understand what we're doing? So I think there's a lot. There's also so much opportunity in it. So I'm always encouraging people to definitely understand those challenges, but definitely try to overcome them as well, because there is so much, as we've just discussed, that games and gaming technology can do to facilitate audience engagement with history.
Thank you. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think there's probably also Jonathan, sorry, were you going to go?
Don't worry,
No, you go, and
I
I'll
will,
just tack on the end. It's not a big point. It was just supporting Amy or something, but you go.
well, as long as you hold that thought in your head, because I'm terrible for forgetting when yeah. So I was going to back Amy up as well. Reliability is going to be the biggest issue. We've done, as I say, relatively little that's truly interactive, that isn't just selecting media from a kiosk or something. And thankfully I don't have to deal with that, but stuff will obviously conk out. Related to, I guess, to do with meeting expectations of the visitor, but especially the gamer, is the lowest expectation is it damn well works. Next up is increasingly everyone has experience of gaming on some level, and if you give them something pony, they will notice. So you've got to be clear on what your requirements are, what your sort of learning outcomes are, because it's probably going to be somehow educational. It's got to be fun, as you also said. It can't be like, it can't meet those outcomes, but in a way that's not fun, because that won't help, and the people who aren't actively learning won't have fun with it. If it's like a paid experience thing, that's a bit different. That's like slide the fun bar all the way up to the top, and maybe a bit of learning. We haven't really done too much of that, other than we've dabbled with a largely digital shooting experience thing, which has yet to happen for various reasons. That's tricky, but I think that would meet the expectations really well, because there's an interactive CO2 powered fake firearm that's connected to the shooting experience, and then various different games within that you can choose. There's a fantastic equivalent of that at the Cody Firearms Museum in Wyoming in the US, where the technology level is relatively basic, but it feels like you're shooting on a range if you kind of, to an extent, and you get the basics of how you stand, how you hold, how you pull the trigger, that kind of thing. And finally, from the other way around, senior management, trustees, there's the issue of glorification for us, and potentially other objects as well. Like if you had to do some interactive gamified thing about smoking, that would be equally difficult. I don't know, pornography, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. All the interesting things in one basket. All of this stuff that's potentially difficult, somewhat safe in the museum environment. I've used a clip from Demolition Man in a couple of presentations that I've done. This idea that everything is safe behind glass in a museum, therefore it's fine to sort of engage with it, but it's hard to engage with it unless Wesley Snipes throws you through the glass. And it's bizarre. It's kind of like another movie reference, Dr. Strangelove, no fighting in the war room. What do you mean you can't let people shoot guns in the gun museum, But we've run into this. We had primitive level technology, flat screen, very basic version of the shooting range thing I'm talking about, but with real deactivated firearms with CO2 giving you some sort of kick. They made us £8,000 a year, and they were ripped out because somebody in senior management thought that was too glorifying of the use of firearms too early in the visitor experience. I'm not even saying they're wrong. I'm just reporting that was a consideration. So it certainly will be going forward. I hate that expression, but it will be. And especially the more immersive it is. If you're doing it with VR, with haptics that are actually CO2 powered or something, but we have a question about that later, I think. So lots to think about. More rambling from me.
I was just going to add, from a kind of making point of view, is that a lot of anything that is large scale, a lot of the immersive technologies that I was talking about are inaccessible unless you're making something massive. So most of the kind of big immersive experience that you see around the UK are like large scale commercially driven ventures with massive IP, or they're much smaller, sort of low budget, but they usually happen once and then go away, and there's not much kind of audience reach, and there's definitely no distribution network, and there's a lot of cultural organizations are excluded from using like game engine technology and stuff like that, for example, because they're perceived and actual cost of creating those kind of experiences. Interestingly, recently I've been running an R&D on a small scale, well, a medium scale venue that my company's been trying to develop, and I'll update you all about it. We're doing a prototype next week, but the idea is that we try to kind of cherry pick which bits of technology that we can use from haptics and some LED technology and using a game engine to make a kind of networkable, smaller scale venue that is accessible to cultural organizations to use, because artists and cultural organizations are missing out on a lot of technology that people want to engage with and will be hopefully will drive people to their venues or to engage with them online. Because one of the things we've been finding as well is once you've created something in a sort of game engine sphere, obviously it can then be used in loads of different formats, so you can then repackage it for various things. Some of your online digital stuff, like if you wanted to put an online VR, if you wanted to do it live, whatever. So we're finding that there is quite an appetite for this, but there's either like these massive ones or these smaller ones. So we're trying at the minute to kind of bridge that gap with a kind of mid-scale accessible one that would hopefully be able to sort of transport the content rather than the whole experience. But anyway, I think that's a massive thing when you're approaching these technologies, is to understand that they're not massively accessible to a lot of spaces on a kind of live sense yet, although we're moving forward with those kind of are becoming more and more accessible and democratized as the technology improves.
All right, thank you. There's a lot there to chew on. There's a lot of it comes back down to cost. There's the accessibility thing. Gonna have a quick Amy, I believe you had experience with the National Video Game Arcade, now National Video Game Museum.
Very briefly, yeah. So I visited them, which is what prompted me to want to study video games at all, or realize that you could study video games, was visiting that when it was back in Nottingham. And I know they've now obviously become a museum based in Sheffield.
Yeah,
and doing some really interesting work particularly around preservation, which is a whole other can of worms, which I'm not going to delve into. The sort of preservation of obsolete technologies, obsolete in inverted commas technologies. But yes.
Yeah, it's the reason I bring it up. It's because I think we keep coming back to cost and sustainability of these experiences and keeping them running. The NBA sort of stood out because it was very specific context, quite technically. I mean, they had a whole team that their job was to bring back old arcade machines back from the dead, right? Quite difficult, preserving these things. But it was one of those cases where they had the know-how, they could keep these running, but even then it was a bit of a trial. So I wonder whether, well, it's a matter of funding, it's a matter of maybe having the in-house and also then the portability of the stuff. Wonderful stuff. So looking at questions and looking at time, we have some very interesting things coming through the chat, and we'll be coming to that soon. Let's quickly move on to, so next general question is there something about the relationship between the physical and digital spaces and the role that technology plays in creating experiences at the intersection of the physical and digital? Now, that's quite broad and could go in various ways. I think we've touched upon it a little bit. We've talked a lot about VR immersive technologies, a little bit about how 3D printing and passive haptics can feed in and haptic experiences. Any thoughts?
From my point of view, I'm always surprised by how little you need to do to have quite a big impact. If you think about some of the kind of, I don't know, like flight simulator stuff that used to get, there's these big machines tipping you everywhere. In one of the experiences we've got in Gunpowder, sounds absolutely nuts, but you're on on like a zip wire, because weirdly, we found a lot of stuff about an actual priest who escaped from the Tower of London by somebody chucking a rope up and slinging it over the moat. So we've kind of made that a bit longer. But all we do is kind of tilt people a bit, pull them back a little bit, tilt them a bit, and then release them about like that far. And people are absolutely because with the headsets on, they think they're like spinning off down the wire, and it is a really small amount. The same with haptics. We have Another experience I've done, we had you're hiding behind a door, and we've just got like a butt kicker speaker, and the speaker goes and it shakes the door when somebody outside is banging on it, and people feel really, but it's tiny. So I think I think what's great is when people are like engaging, and same with games, haptics in handsets and all of it. Like when people are engaged in it, you don't need to do much to give them a really to make it feel really amazing. Yeah, and I'd be interesting to know what you thought about that, Jonathan, in terms of the CO2 and stuff, because I haven't heard about that before. But that, for me, definitely it does way more than you think.
Yeah, I definitely can. This sort of intersects with the more you know, the less rewarding like a minimal hardware solution is going to be. So I pick up a very lightweight. We actually have, in fact, bear with me. When I first visited, this isn't real. When I first visited the museum in 2000, 24 years ago, more than 24 years ago, there's a crossbow range, a new version of which is now here. Come and try it out. And there was also a shooting experience. And I was kind of surprised even then that was a thing, because it was essentially a police style, presumably VHS based, with some kind of sensor system to tell when you had shot the bad guy. So you were like, should I shoot? Should I not? And it eventually did get taken out because someone decided that it was not, in fact, appropriate to pretend to be a policeman in a sort of frisible, glib kind of way, potentially. And of course, you don't know how people are going to react, how they're going to behave. They won't necessarily understand the nuances and the context. But what the hardware solution was, this is a very old spring airsoft gun, and the guts are now, well, there are some guts in here that I can't show you, but it was a wired solution. All it did was move the trigger. The laser, I think, is still in there, and it was a laser-based thing that somehow was detected the other end in some vaguely analog fashion. Now, the immersion there came from the almost life-size projection that was going on, and the kind of thought process of, God, what would I do? And what am I going to do? I've got to do this. So you weren't too worried about this being a very lightweight, plasticky thing that doesn't move and do anything. But if you're coming to it, maybe you've done it a load, maybe you work there, maybe you know a load about this stuff, you've shot real guns, and it's kind of, well, this is really lame. So for the majority of the British public, you're not going to have to do much to trick their brain into maybe feeling like they're shooting for whatever purpose, a soldier at Waterloo with a musket, whatever it might be, or something a bit more near the knuckle and contemporary like we had with the Glocks there. Yeah, difficult, but yeah, I mean, I think with the sensors, it's easier to trick the brain. You can do a lot through the eyes, you can do a lot with audio, and a little bit of a nudge, like you say, can make a huge difference, and the brain will take you the rest of the way. The classic VR thing of, whoa, I feel like I'm falling off the ledge. I'm literally not moving. So if you just give them a bit of a nudge, it feels massive. Same with theme park rides as well. Harder, I think, for my specific application to, because even people who don't know guns feel like it should be really, really loud and really, really recoiling, but maybe even more than it is in reality in some cases. So expectations are a huge part of anything. And same would be for driving, like you say, flying. I think that's maybe a bit easier, but maybe people don't have to deal with that.
Yeah, again.
Oh, I think badly timed. Don't worry, I can vamp for Amy for a little bit because I think she had a thing lined up there.
It keeps
Oh,
happening.
there you are.
I don't know what it is.
Quick recovery.
My internet's been fine all day, so I don't know what it's doing now.
Service law.
Just doesn't want me to talk clearly. So come back to that haptic. Definitely the idea of more can be less, or less can be more even, sorry, as Hannah was saying. I think one of the examples I jump to a lot is the Dambuster. I think I mentioned earlier the Dambuster experience at the RAF Museum. Probably is Cotswold, the London location. But they sort of, I think, and a lot of the time it's around the idea of that when you integrate the physical, I think it's around how do you bring touch in, because that's the one thing you can't really recreate in VR. to the same extent maybe as you can with just a physical set. So they created sort of not even a full plane, but like an MDF bit of plane. That the idea was that the experience would take part in that, and you could move around the space and you'd feel your way around the space, and it would be replicated in the VR, so you could see, oh, this I'm moving a further up the plane. Which I thought was a really clever way of just, again, adding that little extra element. And the other thing they did was they had haptic, I think they included haptic vests in that experience. And the idea with that was very simple. It was just to create the feeling of the rumble of the engine. I think it's the Lancaster bomber they were on. So they're like, but we've got it in the ears. Let's also just have it just to create that little bit of deeper immersion, I suppose. And they just had that haptic vest to recreate that rumble. And I think it also might have created little shakes when the flak was fired and that sort of thing. Just to sort of deepen the experience of you are in the place of the people who did this. And I just thought that was a really clever use again of just combining the physical with the digital in a really simple way. And I know I've already mentioned the 3D printing, which I think is a genius way of bringing digital to physical, which I thought was really, really clever. And my other favorite example is Father and Son, which I did write about on the blog, I believe, which was a mobile game, which was made for, I think, the National Archaeological Museum of Naples. And they did the opposite. They brought digital to physical in the sense that you could only unlock certain areas of the game if you physically went to the museum and scanned QR.
Here a few seconds. But, in the meantime, I do encourage everybody in the audience to please do submit questions. Yeah, the tech is not with us today. But in the meantime, yeah, it's this idea that a little bit goes a long way really does hold. We had a passive haptic VR experience recreating rather the first ever photography exhibit. In the real scene, there was a fireplace. Just giving you a few minutes. Yep, there she is.
I'm somehow now
we
here twice. I don't know how to
yes.
imagine that. Feel free to pick out the other version of me. Sorry, I think I was just saying that they put QR codes in the physical museum. So the idea was, and I think to an extent quite successfully, was to get people who encountered the museum in the game into the physical space and actually encountering the sort of objects they'd recreated in the game, which I thought was very cool.
That sort of thing, encouragement to visit locations and blended spaces is quite a keen. So sorry, what I was mentioning is just to recap things. Thank you for that, by the way. That little bit goes a long way. So VR experience, fireplace in the virtual experience, and we had a storage heater at the exact right place as a sort of passive haptics through people's minds. Having said that, so it's with the sort of research hat on and what's coming out here, it's like, oh yes, there is a scale. There's always a bit of a scale of fidelity. What is the balance between how accurate we can make something, and then you sort of run into an uncanny valley effect, which is there but not quite there. And then experts will notice. So you have one dimension being what the fidelity is. The massive cost is another dimension, and then your audience, as Jonathan says, you might not need to go very far. Oh, Amy's gone. Nope, she's still here, but not spotlighted. Zoom. Not go very far with some audiences. Right now I'm doing a research project with children. Turns out I can 3D print some fidgets and I'm good to go. But as the expertise of the audience increases, and then there's where a know your audience kind of thing, then you need to do things a little bit differently. For example, I can imagine something that's very hard to simulate on is concussion. The concussive effect you feel, especially with large calibers. And that was.
Yeah, I was going to say actual concussion. You can just hit them with a big hammer. No, you're quite right. It definitely is. All of it is. All of it is. Incredibly loud noises that you would need hearing protection for. I mean, I guess with headsets, or especially in ear, you can simulate the muffled version of the sound that you would get through hearing protection. So that you can do. The visuals you can do really well. You cannot do well without a very expensive CO2-based system. You can't, and even if you do, that does not approach the recoil of any of these kind of military or police, even historic stuff, grade stuff. You just can't do it. But you can give the brain those nudges, and they might fill in the blanks, but never going to be, of all the things you can do. Like the sensation of speed, I think you do really well. The sensation of flight, you can do really well. Having done a bit of both of those, But having done a lot of shooting at this point, there's just nothing that really there's the only way it works is if you're distracted enough by the story, by moving through the space, by engaging with the characters, that there's enough gunning going on. Sorry, Hannah.
No, all I was going to say is that I think audiences are really, really literate on loads of different media. So if you get the onboarding right, so they kind of have a sense of what they're going into, which can be quite difficult. Once they understand what they're in, you can trust them to pick up all kinds of signals. So we have so in Gunpowder and in another thing I did in 1984 and a few other things, we had a full score, and it was really interesting. And so it's worth saying actually that the technology behind the control systems was extraordinary, and that really helped because it meant things played at the right time. But they know that something's coming, or they immerse more in that bit of the story because we're giving them the load of signals that they're picking up from films, they're picking up from gaming, they're picking up from television, they're picking up from everything. So people are really, really clever at understanding stories and the modalities we use to tell stories. So you can very quickly kind of pull people to a place just by understanding all those other kind of mediums and putting them into a different kind of format. People are really good at that. And then the other thing I think is really important about technology now is accessibility. And we were talking about it in terms of people accessing use of the tech, but we now have the ability, especially if you're using game engines or other stuff, to build in accessibility into the production process. So it's very easy to put in audio descriptions or whatever you need to do to make sure that people can access this technology in multiple different ways depending on their needs. And I think that's a really massive leap forward, because even say 5 or 6 years ago when I was making stuff, it was always kind of an add-on at the end to try to make sure it was included because it was quite difficult to do. But now it's very much thought of in the early stages of building stuff because it's within the processes that people are using to build out some of these experiences. And obviously games have always been good with that, but I think it is making a really big difference to and in a really good way, people are thinking differently then about how they're making these things, which is changing the way that they're made. So I don't know, both saying accessibility is really important, and also I think audiences are really, really clever. So they pick up on all kinds of things. You can do so little to get a lot across. Yeah, anyway, that's my 2 pence.
All right, fantastic. Now the moment we've all been waiting for, audience questions. So all good on that one. So what have we got? Let's see. So question, everybody. Do you think that video games or gaming technologies can find their way into the school curriculum, and what could or does that look like? So one example that's been brought up is how you can use Assassin's Creed Odyssey to show students what ancient Greece could have looked like. I stress could.
I want to hop straight in on this because to an extent, not in arts and stuff, it has already happened. So if you're aware of the game Portal, which I love dearly, they had an entire, I don't even know if it was a separate game. They basically created a portal for schools as a way that you could use Portal to teach physics, which I thought was fascinating. They had an entire course. So yeah, yes is the very simple answer. It can be done and it has been done. I think that you have to think very carefully about how it's done. So I think Portal probably worked with educators to some extent in developing that. And I think a lot of times games come into curriculum or it's brought into by, for example, individual teachers. I'm aware of some case studies that have been done, particularly with Assassin's Creed, around how that has changed or improved to some extent the students' understanding of history. I think it was done in America, particularly with Assassin's Creed 3, around sort of their perception of historical figures and their knowledge of historical figures, and whether that was influenced by engaging with Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed, of course, now has discovery modes, which are designed to be educational. So I think that might, as you said, be something that's used more, perhaps. But I do think one of the things that potentially might prevent it again is the cost, and it's the time and understanding of how do I build this into my lessons? How does it contribute more broadly to the curriculum? Can we afford the cost of, for example, paying for Portal or whatever it was? But I do think, yeah, it is already happening, and I would love to see it happening more, especially as there seems to be sort of growing interest, particularly around the educational and learning power of games. And I'd love to see it happen more with this sort of historical stuff. But I'll leave it there for now. We might have to come back.
Ubisoft partnered with a documentary company in Canada to make a documentary called Lady Sapiens, which is such a weird name, but it was a documentary about prehistoric women, and then off that they used the same game engine footage to make a playable young game for kids around prehistoric animals. And they also partnered with a museum in France to make a exhibition. I think it was about ancient Greece. They have a kind of outreach branch that quite often partners with cultural and educational organizations in order to kind of try to bridge that gap between using what they're creating and then allowing schools and other organizations to access it. So I think they're pretty amazing.
Sorry, another thing has just come to mind. So if Jonathan, I'm just going to hop back in. I think one of the things I've seen happening quite a lot, particularly around getting museum content to schools and using that as a educational resource, is Minecraft. Again, because it is already designed, aimed at that age group. That age group's quite familiar with it, and because there's so much you can do with it. I think I mentioned the Create Your Museum competition the Museum of Wales ran, and that's aimed at school children. But there's also things like the Great Fire of London maps by the Museum of London, which you can download. There's a bunch of, I think they've got sort of resources to help teachers, not specifically with that Minecraft maps, but sort of teaching around the Great Fire of London. And I do wonder if they could maybe incorporate those Minecraft maps as well as part of that, sort of getting the class to move around the space and better understand through the sort of 3D representation how the fire spread, what the fire spread. And yes, Len, you are completely correct. Kenilworth Castle did a Minecraft recreation with, I believe, Minecraft YouTubers, again, just to get it out to that audience. And I think I also, as part of that series, did a bit on just tips for how to build more accurate castles in Minecraft, which I thought was very cool. Not specifically related to schools, but really interesting.
Sorry, Jonathan, you wanna?
Yeah, sure. Just quickly, I think the issue for us is going to be obviously guns for kids. So you would struggle. The easy thing is the further back you go. I call it jolly pirate syndrome. Pirates are somehow fine, even though they're just as violent as anyone living today and use essentially the same tools. But in terms of, I guess, triggering some people and certainly causing complaints and that kind of thing. And again, it depends on the context very much. If you're just letting people have a play with stuff, and it could be. It's always going to be easier to do older stuff. So you could do something standing in a rank at Waterloo, loading and shooting a musket. I mean, that would be difficult enough if you're shooting at human-shaped targets, obviously, but considerably easier to sort of justify and get through the various permissions routes than anything later, basically. But that was my thought. Or a gun crew, I guess, might be easier. You've got the physical distance. You can't see what you're shooting at. You have a bunch of people working together in VR, like some of these team-based. There's a really good submarine one, I gather now. You work together on it as a again, in theory, you're out there killing people, but you don't actually see them. So you could do the same thing for a gun crew where you're swabbing, ramming, loading, all of that, and getting a good sense of some of the historical detail and also working as a team. And ballistic trajectories, maths.
It does raise a very good point that the subject matter can make things quite tricky. I mean, it's funny how every submarine U-boat simulation game with board game digital thing is U-boats,
I
which
just
already raises questions.
hop in on
Of
the
course.
idea of subject matter really quickly. Absolutely fascinating thing I came across quite recently was Fortnite now has a Holocaust museum. Like there is a map in Fortnite that you can go onto, which is yeah, essentially a virtual Holocaust museum. But they had a huge discussion around how players engage with that, and I think they ended up deactivating emotes because they're like, this is a really serious subject matter. We've got a player base that is, you know, broadly young, teenage probably. And how do you sort of encourage appropriate interaction in that space? And I just thought it was really interesting thinking about that idea of guns and school children and that idea of how do you integrate things like the Holocaust into a very popular shooting game. So I just thought that was absolutely fascinating. A choice of platform and B that their approach to it around how then do you get people to engage in that way.
That's fascinating. So just very briefly jump in just to say we always treat technology in a silo, don't we? Digital technology as its own thing, and obviously we have been talking about the overlap with the physical, but setting it completely aside just for a moment to point out that how people behave clearly it's been studied in museology for decades, but how people behave in spaces and what's appropriate, what isn't, if they're not suitably, to use the experience word, onboarded or whatever. We had a session recently where some people, I won't tell you who they are, definitely did not treat the objects with any kind of appropriate respect, and even pointed the guns at each other, and one put one to their head and asked to get a photo taken with that. So we felt like we'd done enough to prevent that from happening, but we apparently hadn't. So it isn't just, you know, the digital world just gives you a different perspective and a different way to get it wrong. Or additional ways to get it wrong, but it's, you know, this is just an extension of what we already do in our various areas, of course. Sorry, obvious thing to say, but
no, but it's fascinating because all the examples you both used there, like, give some sort of distance, right? Like either digitally or physically from the impact of what. And then what was kind of shocking about the person with the gun is like that's a really localized impact, like direct. I don't know. Is that right, Jonathan? Like it's about not visualizing the direct impact of what the gun does. It's fascinating.
I think at the moment it is, but I don't know that it should be. Somebody posted a very interesting comment about the Imperial War Museum's gaming exhibition where they had prosthetics where people had been injured in war to sort of offset or, you know, make you think about the impact of the game or the reality that the games reflect. So you've either got to sort of provide that distance, emotional, intellectual, physical, in order to not deal with it, or you've got to tackle it head on and deal with it with enough context and education and people on hand or whatever, and trigger warnings and all of that to deal with it properly. And obviously, I'd far rather do that. Not digital technology and not gaming at all related anecdote, very briefly, is a proposal for 10 years ago for our First World War display. And perhaps they would have considered doing it digitally, but I don't think it was meant to be that. It was literally just a fake sniper rifle with a fake optical telescopic sight pointed at the stairs up to the display. And the idea was you would realize you had been in the crosshairs of another visitor previously and would be confronted in a way that hopefully would be contextualized and could be understood without terrifying and traumatizing people. That got absolutely nowhere and was immediately killed by the director when it got to him. And I thought I totally understood why. I don't think I would have wanted to have said yes to that, but it would have been very brave and interesting if he had, and especially if it had involved some sort of digital augmentation. It makes it more relevant to this, so I'll shut up.
All right, this is fascinating because actually one of the VR exhibits I've worked on, I'll just pop a link there, was a National Holocaust Museum VR experience for Holocaust viewers. To the idea being you could walk it because the only evidence there is are photographs. Who took those photographs, right? So granted, this collided a bit with COVID, so it had to be browser based, but it was meant to be VR. You could walk into the pictures, see who took them, see what's happening before. And as you can imagine, a lot of the stuff we've done, half the worry has been we're letting people bring in so museums, you know, there is a curatorial interpretation of what you're seeing, right? You guys are the professionals, but but increasingly we're seeing experiences where the audience, the visitors, can bring in their own interpretations and maybe share them, whether it's writing something on a poster and sticking it on the wall, or in the case of somebody's experience at some point sitting down and recording in via their interpretation of a 3D print they were holding. The guardrails for that, especially in some context, were quite something. So yeah, it's a whole thing to unpack there, and probably in many cases confronting the terminal effects of some stuff would, there's where the learning objectives come in. So lots of conversation. Right. I actually do have a next question for Jonathan specifically. Do you also work in sound design for weapons in games? Also for the rest of the panel, I have a note here, and it kind of makes sense, so hopefully we'll expand on this.
Yes, yes and no. So I think it was 2013. I think I was mentioning this to somebody off camera. We were approached by a guy that was doing consultancy himself for sounds for games and movies, and I guess he was what we probably didn't appreciate at the time is he was building a library to then sell those in future. So bespoke for the things he was working on, then he could resell later. So we probably didn't make as much money after that as we should have done, but it was very interesting, and I got to shoot about a ton of different guns, which was very interesting, and I'm not ashamed to say enjoyable as well. But I was concerned at the time that we were putting quite a lot of wear and exposing to quite a lot of risk, albeit it was stuff that we had more than one of. It was we have a sort of a system in place to allow part of the collection to be operated and even fired. So we had, I had carefully selected what I thought we could, but we're offsetting stuff for the future, surviving versus money, essentially. This was a commercial thing. And so I was a little bit, I'm not sure that we can do this again, that we want to do this again. And the amount of money we got for it was, I don't think, worth that. So, but we did provide audio for, there was a film I haven't seen, I don't think anyone else has seen, the Mad Max game from Remedy, which not Remedy, sorry, Quantum Break from Remedy, which was very good, I thought, and the Mad Max game, which was only one gun, effectively just being upgraded loads, but it was layered from multiple different shotguns. So that's me shooting that. If you ever play that, it's about £1.50 on Steam right now. So go away and play that. It's really good if you like Mad Max. Less so if you don't. Since then, we haven't really, except for as part of consultancy. So developers will come in and they will do their own Foley sounds, operating, ejecting, loading, not usually dropping onto a surface, which was something else that the guys in 2013 did that made me, like, my museum brain was twanging. Didn't do any discernible damage, but nonetheless. So they will do some sound stuff, usually working parts, that kind of thing. And we have not done any shooting for games or films since then. I think there are better places to go to do that. We're more about the expertise in concert with some unusual stuff that you won't get to model elsewhere. And then we also have a really good selection of ordinary stuff that you can get a load of reference material, photos, video, whatever, at the same time. So we're not quite a one-stop shop, unfortunately. Sorry, a very long-winded answer to that question.
Oh, thank you. Before we move on, anybody else sound design experience providing sounds, or how much of a sound design plays a role in your creation so far?
Well, I mean, I work with sound a lot. I'm lucky enough to work with some really amazing sound designers, and I've seen them do terrible things to items for Foley. So I think you're probably right there, Jonathan. But yeah, I mean, it is obvious, but like immersion, it sounds just, it can be so like key. Like everyone's heard that really ancient old recording of the binaural thing where you get your hair cut back in the day. You heard that binaural recording of getting a haircut? It's really old. It's one of the first ones and it's like getting your hair cut in Italian hairdressers, hair barbers. But it's one of the earliest examples of binaural, and it's if you get your mum to do it on Christmas, and when they try to buzz cut her head, you'll see her do this, and it's very evocative, and it is really interesting to see what spatialized sound does. And obviously spatialized sound is used across all these experiences and everything, it does make a massive difference to like how you feel in a space. If there is a sound coming from here that's correct, it's really, really evocative and really fun. It's really fun to like creep people out. Yeah, but that's worth checking out. I'll put it in the link. It's very, very, very old, but it's good fun just to think about like that, what spatial sound does in terms of direct sound from one place.
All right, thank you. Yeah, full believer in sound design being absolutely critical. It really makes all those things. A pretty good team here for that. So, look, with an eye on the time, so what piece of technology do you think would be a game changer in your work and would allow you to do something around history and games that hasn't been possible so far?
I could probably jump in there and picking up with the sort of talk about CO2 as a way to get firearms, replica firearms, giving you more feedback than you can get with a motor in a haptic setup. There is a middle ground, by the way. I don't know if you've probably seen there are $300 or whatever peripherals that give you more of a kit from a moving slide type thing. And then there are CO2 systems that are used for actual training. British Army uses the dismounted close combat trainer, which uses real service weapons with CO2 driving the bolts and things, which is quite a lot more realistic. What might really change things is basically not going to happen, which is safe guns that use actual powder charges and ejecting cases to operate themselves, but don't produce anything lethal out of the front. Effectively, some form of blank firing firearm. So still potential safety issues there because the high pressure gas has to go somewhere. If you've ever seen Darren Brown's Russian roulette thing, he demonstrates that, and that bit's real. The actual bit at the end, spoiler alert, probably not. So I don't think the answer is it probably can't for my side of things. That true kind of simulation level is technically achievable, but realistically probably not doable. But there are places. Oh god, it's gone out of my head. Amazing American Open Air Museum, Colonial Williamsburg has a have-a-go musket range, and you shoot real replica, but real muskets, real bullets at targets. So a bit of a ramble to say you can't really do better than we can currently do, I suspect. Maybe you'll get a trickle down with even the CO2 stuff is not without its hazards and its cost and its faff. The thing we were looking at something a bit better than this for the baseline, and then you'd pay more to have something that actually operated using CO2. That's more of a pay for experience than truly educational.
I'm sitting there thinking that I don't think there's actually anything specifically that I can think of that couldn't necessarily be done with today's technology. I think for me, what's been really interesting is seeing the integration of different technologies and what that can lead to, like that VR blacksmith with the 3D printer. So I think for me, it's going to be about seeing the different ways different technologies are integrated together to sort of create something that's something a bit different. But unless we invent time travel, which would be awesome. Things like, saving Heritage Cross, we really don't have people who know how to do it. There's nothing we can do with technology to do that, for instance, and there probably never will be. But yeah, I think for me, it's less about thinking about what can't we do and more thinking creatively about what we can do with what we've currently got, but maybe haven't quite got it to work the way we want yet, or is there something we haven't tried integrating with this yet that might actually enhance the experience?
There's a few things. I think the first one is that we're starting to see the normalization of AR with people wearing, glasses where they're filming stuff, and even like goggles where you can go swimming and it tells you like, how many lengths you've done, what your heart rate is or whatever. So people are starting to have wearables in a kind of day-to-day format. And when you combine that with the way AI and other technologies are personalizing kind of all of our generalized experience, I think we're going to see more and more of that in a live sense, so that you can be in a museum or in a concert or in an immersive experience or playing a game or whatever, and you're going to see the game or whatever you're in adapt to your personalized preferences, which is great for accessibility, maybe less great for community depending on how far it goes. I think that's coming. Personally, something that I've wanted to have a go on for ages is Disney has got a thing called a hollow tile floor, and it's basically a floor that he knows what I mean. It just looks amazing. If you can walk on it, and it feels like different textures, and it allows you to walk on the spot, or run, and it feels like you're going and going. So once you combine this with like open world VR, you can literally roam around, wherever you want. And like I'd love, it's very expensive. I'd love to get my hands on that and like try to like maybe combine that with some bungees, and then you could fly around Rome or leap a building and then run about. But yeah, those kind of, yeah, I think that would be cool. Basically, that would be fun.
I think we're all on the same page there. So ubiquitous immersive technologies that we can just tap into like phones. Sorry for later. Remind me to tell you about our virtual reality Superman flying experience involving bungee cords and a swing that we had outside my office. Long story. So around the time. Next audience question for Hannah, Amy, and Ashley. What sort of immersive experience would you love to make? Is in the business of making them. And Jonathan, I'm sure you got ideas too.
That's a really tricky
I've got a
one.
few.
I'm sitting there going, my mind has now gone absolutely blank. I don't know why. I think I'd love to make something like the blacksmith, something where you can do something and have something come out of it at the end. So I've only ever made really, really basic things, I have to say. I've made a sort of twine game for the National Justice Museum, which was about interpretation of objects, which may be people living in prison. And that's sort of the limit of what I've personally been involved with. But I think I just love to see generally games used more. And just trying to think if there's anything in particular that I'd really love to see. No, nothing is coming to mind. I've gone completely blank. I may have to come back to you.
I like half torn between like I'd love to do something else that was like kind of like the gunpowder plot was kind of a super famous story, so it had a load of really interesting kind of like challenges around how we were going to approach it. So I'd love to do that side of it. Having done a lot of theatre, we're used to like in real emotional kind of scenes in there. In immersive so far, I think we're still used to the attraction language, and we're still working out the boundaries of that really strong emotional connectivity. So I'd like to kind of do that, like work out how we can make something that was like hugely emotional. I've had a few things that have in my head about, death, the immersive experience, but maybe no one would go. But yeah, that kind of, I'd like to try and see like how emotional we can make it without being exploitative.
I was about to say, Hannah, have you seen 11/11 Memories Retold?
No, I haven't. Is that super?
Aardman did a centenary game for the centennial of the First World War.
Right,
And
yeah.
that was it was designed to look like a painting that sort of followed soldiers on different sides of their story. So I just thought,
Oh yeah, okay,
might be interested.
Great. Yeah, I do.
Just based on that. And I've now had my thought, because I was recently playing the Stanley Parable. I would love to do something around sort of the meta of a museum in a game. So what I loved about the Stanley Parable was it had a museum of the game's developments. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. So I'd love to do something like that. That's just a little bit fourth wall breaking, meta, delved into the processes behind making an exhibition or something, but in game form.
There's a few more questions going on there. Just trying to read comments.
As I say, I love museums in games. Even the Call of Duty one, I forget which one it was in, but there was one there. I've always Yeah, I'll just take time to go and wander around them and assess them as though they're real.
Yeah, I'm fairly sure there were articles in COVID about the Last of Us
Brilliant.
Part 2 museum and how
That's
accurate it was and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I have yet to play either of those games. My oldest friend is berating me the other day for still not having played it. So I ordered it on Music Magpie in front of him. So I will be playing that. The first one.
Right. Sorry, keep an eye on the time. There's Half-Life 2 the commentary on, I was going to say. And so Hannah, we should talk about artist-led research and meaningful mixed reality experiences, which I think I'm trying to do. So I think slowly going to wrap up. Questions coming in, but unfortunately time is tight. We'll see how many we get. So I might ask one for all of you. What's one piece of advice you would have for a small museum that's trying to incorporate technology into historical exhibits? Nice broad one. I think across the line here, we've had quite a few insights already, but if you were to say one thing.
I think probably the biggest piece of advice from me was think in the long term around, is that piece of technology going to be something that is there for 10 years? How are you going to maintain it? And then sort of secondary to that is that definitely the right approach to take? Because technology can definitely offer really interesting things. One of the things I say is, games can offer awesome stuff for museums, but is a game the right thing for your museum and your story? So I think definitely plan for the long term and really consider which piece of technology, why, how.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say similarly, you can't make anything immersive without involving your operational team within the development, because as soon as you do that, you end up with something that can't sit there on its own and can't self-maintain, or that you suddenly need 6 people to run or whatever. So it's good to bring that in from the beginning. That sound is like easily the cheapest way to get immersive technologies into any space, which I'm sure people know, but sometimes it's the easiest things that are overlooked. And I've definitely been guilty of trying to chuck things at something when there was a much simpler solution. And then lastly, just start with whatever your amazing museum is, and just start with a story, and then there'll be something that fits. If you can make the story better by using that technology or immersifying it, then great. But sometimes you've already got what's already there. There's so many amazing spaces already around. Yeah.
Yeah, I think small music. Keep it simple. Well, first of all, as Amy says, is it the right approach? Would you be better off spending resources piping some oral history and talking about the subject matter in question? That's right back to the source, to the horse's mouth. It's low tech. It's easily achievable. It's extremely immersive. Maybe do that instead. If you do decide to do something interactive, digital or digital analog with peripherals or whatever, keep it as simple as you possibly can. Yeah, probably just those. And tell people you're doing it. I totally agree.
I'd also say test, and test again.
Yes,
Like
absolutely.
definitely run it with the public. Does it actually work in the way you intend? Because it's something that happened. I was going to be involved with, I think it was Nottingham Castle's development of some games for their new galleries. And then COVID hit during the period they were going to do the public testing, so they couldn't do it. And I think they had quite a few teething problems as a result of actually it doesn't quite work in the way they intended, or people weren't quite using it in the way they intended because they hadn't had the chance to test.
Okay, looking at the time, I think we can wrap up. Thank you very much, everybody. Cass, any final thoughts? Anything else anybody would like to mention? A couple of minutes. There's some very nice questions. It's maybe some things to follow up later on.
No, just to say it's been fascinating. So thanks, Jonathan and Amy. It's really, you've been so interesting to hear everything you had to say. So thanks for the links. I'm gonna go look them all up.
Definitely seconded. Thank you so much, Hannah, Jonathan. It's been great to meet you and to hear from varying perspectives. It's always great to get out of the little bubble you're in, I think. And feel free to get in touch with me. I think the links are somewhere on the Historical Games Network site if you have further questions for me. Always happy. And he's going my thesis on the intersection of museum interpretation and video games. I swear it's more interesting than it sounds.
Not only will I read it, I will send it to all my colleagues as well, make them read it.
Oh, you legend.
We do have a separate, as I say, exhibitions department. Hey, they may be ahead of me on this. They may have already read it. But thank you, guys. Really interesting.
And I should probably say, shouldn't I have a company called Buried Giants if anybody wants anything they need. We're around. So there you go. And we should definitely all three get together. Well, all of us. A load of us.
Jonathan, what's your YouTube channel, real quick? That YouTube channel of yours.
What's the YouTube channel?
Right. So we have the Royal Armouries channel, which we will have to be doing some gaming content on at some point. Currently, it's the more historical stuff, and the 200 videos that you can plow through if you're completely insane is GameSpot, and they are on there for the time being. I imagine as they're still making the money, they will leave them on there.
Okay, thank you. I see folks are leaving. Thank you all again. You've been a fantastic panel. I've been holding back from asking questions and jumping. It's also difficult as a panel. But I would very much also like to thank the HGN team who have been in the background keeping everything running and who organized this thing to begin with. So fantastic events, these things. Oh, yes, indeed. Expert reacts. So everybody, it's 5:30. Is it? Oh, wow. Right. And should let you get on. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And have a great night. And hopefully we'll keep in touch.